Hey, it's Dana Brown.
Hey, it's Jeremy Elkin, and you're tuning into Animal Status. Wait, sorry, what is it? I'm blanking.
Animal Status only on Shade 45. My name is DJ Wonder, and tonight I gotta set the fire. We're gonna introduce two new members of the Midnight Society, and they're not rappers this time. They're actually filmmakers. They worked on one of the best documentaries I've seen in recent times. Maybe because the subject matter hits me so hard, so close to home. But it's Jeremy Elkin and Dana Brown. Welcome to Animal Status, guys. How you doing?
What's going
Good,
on?
good man. Thanks for having us.
That's right, no problem. I literally just watched the film that's in theaters now. It's called All the Streets Are Silent: The Convergence of Hip Hop and Skateboarding, 1987 to 1997. And it's pretty amazing film, man. If you're into hip hop, if you're into fashion, if you're into skateboarding, of course, you kind of hit all of those things in this film. And but before we get into the actual film itself, what is your guys' personal like experience in the film industry, and have you ever worked on any projects together before this one?
You want to
Sure.
take you want to take that, Jeremy?
Yeah, so Dana actually hired me at Vanity Fair to be sort of the first like digital video guy there, and that was at the end of 2013, and then I left there at the end of 2016, and I think Dana, you left in 2017, maybe something like
2017.
that.
Yep.
And yeah, we reconnected after I had been working on the film for probably about a year and a half at that point, and I probably 6 months into production on it, maybe 8 months in, and showed what I had to Dana, and we just started trying to make the story bigger and see if there was more to it than just like a series of short films or like a 40-minute piece or whatever I was in planning on doing. We were trying to expand on it and make it something more substantial, which of course helped when we discovered Mars nightclub, because up until that point it was still, we had heard about it, there's nothing really online, and it wasn't until we did the Eli interview, which is the narrator Eli Gesner, that we discovered where he was a club promoter, and that opened up the story in a different way.
Nice. Well, and I did look a little bit into your guys' IMDb. You both worked on like Call Me Caitlin, which was a mini documentary on Caitlyn Jenner, right? Before this.
Yeah, it's a funny one to bring up on a hip hop show, but yeah, man, I was part of the team at the magazine that put together the Caitlyn Jenner cover. And Jeremy was our filmmaker, so I flew him out to LA when we did the photo shoot, and I can't tell you exactly what we're doing, but we're going to a big photo shoot. So we were one of maybe 9 or 10 people at the photo shoot with Annie Leibovitz and Caitlyn Jenner, and Jeremy had 10 minutes to set up a camera and do a quick interview with Caitlyn and put together this fantastic movie. So All the Streets Are Silent is a totally different thing for us
Right.
than the Caitlyn Jenner, and was really a passion project for both of us.
Nice. Well, let me ask Jeremy real quick, because I've heard that you were into the skateboard community, and I'm guessing that's what kind of drew you to this project.
Yeah, I mean, I made skate videos for pretty much had a camera in my hand from like 2000 until like 2014, and overlapping with other forms of production, commercial, editorial, art projects, etc. And yeah, it was the subject matter in this film is very much it wasn't like I had to like research or learn about the subject matter. It was a natural progression for me. It was nothing I wasn't familiar with.
Right. And then was New York City a destination for you kind of growing up? Or you're from Montreal originally?
From Montreal, yeah. I was coming here my whole life because my mom's from the Bronx and her side of the family's from the city. My dad is French from Montreal. So I was always, sort of, New York is like a bigger, shinier Montreal, with a lot more happening, especially at that time in the late 90s into 2000s. And yeah, it was always like sort of automatic, like, how can we get down here? How can we keep making skate videos down here? Like, who can we meet? There was just so much going on at that time. So it was super exciting for me as a kid to come down here in the 90s.
Right. Yeah. And then Dana, so Jeremy, you kind of like you may have missed what people call like the golden era of like New York City skating, because it kind of it went back, I guess, West Coast maybe towards the late 90s, early 2000s, but that mid 90s, which you document in the film, was kind of like a crazy time to be here. Actually, you know, if you were filming or something like that. Then did you ever experience like either clubbing or skateboard culture or anything during that time?
Well, you know, it's funny because Jeremy and I think one of the reasons we work together so well as a team, and one of the reasons the film worked out so well is I'm quite a bit older than Jeremy. I won't give away my age, but you know, I'm from a different generation, and so I grew up with a lot of this stuff. And you know, I was a skateboarder very briefly in the early '80s when it was just purely a West Coast thing. You know, and you wouldn't see skateboarders around a lot. The culture, the skateboard culture was West Coast, and that's what we looked to. Thrasher magazine was West Coast. The boards were all, you know, California riders. You know, and then hip hop started emerging, you know, in the '80s, and I think every kid in New York was like, "What is this? You know, this is interesting." And so, yeah, I mean, I'm, you know, Jeremy's the hip hop head and the skate head. I'm the native New Yorker who's a little older, who brought a slightly different, you know, interest in this story. And, you know, to me, it was always like a culture documentary about New York and just about like the emergence of cool shit happening in New York that seems to happen every generation. You know what I mean?
Watching this film, it kind of hits everything that I don't know, my whole life was kind of made up from. Like I was a skateboarder. Eventually I became a DJ. I wanted to move to New York City because it was the epicenter of the music that I was listening to. I watched the movie Kids and it kind of like changed my life or whatever. And all those, I watched the Zoo York mixtape, my favorite skateboard video of all time, Zoo York mixtape. All that stuff kind of made me who I am. Is that the audience you're going for? Or are you looking to kind of open up this to people who have may not know anything about any of those things?
Yeah, I think it's definitely both. I mean, you have, you know, I always say it, but it's like the guy walking down the street wearing Supreme that doesn't know the history of the brand or the shop or the people behind it or how everything connected. Like that's what was really interesting to me is how is the people and how it all connects. And then even you know friends of mine who are skaters or pro skaters who've been in the industry for a while and or like you know in their mid 30s like me who didn't know a lot of that history. So I think it's like I think it sort of hits sort of anyone who's interested in that subject matter, no matter your you know your skill level on a skateboard or a microphone or not. You know.
Right. What do you think by picking 87 to 97, it's an interesting time. It's also kind of correlates with what people call like the golden era of hip hop, which is usually around 80, 87, 88 to around, I don't know, 92 or something like that. Some people take it up to 96. Um, how does that particular decade influence like fashion, music, everything today? And why did you pick those specific years?
Dana, you want to grab this
Let me
one?
take that. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think if you look at that era of hip hop, you know, and I would, in my head, I pushed the golden age to around 95-ish, you know, maybe 96 even. Um, you walk around on the streets in any city, in any country right now, and you will see the effect that this time period had on everything. I mean, you can't go, you know, you're in Asia, you're right, you see kids skateboarding, wearing Supreme, you know, wearing other brands like that, listening to hip hop, like the power of this moment. And it's also, you know, and this is something I learned, that this is also considered the golden age of skateboarding, sort of came a little later, but overlaps with this sort of second half of the golden age of hip hop. And just the power of these two things. And you see the result everywhere. And to me, that's what was so interesting about this story. Like to me, like this moment, the golden age of hip hop and street skating in New York, is kind of like the last great moment, cultural moment that New York had. And, you know, you go back to you know, Warhol and Basquiat and what they were doing in the 80s and the art scene and Keith Haring in the 80s. You go back to punk rock and CBGBs in the 70s and just how that influenced the world. And then you go even further back to the Velvet Underground and Warhol's Factory. And then even farther back to all the amazing sort of mid-century artists in New York. Like this is just like cultural continuation of the power of New York and just how creative it is. And this vast cultural history of this city is just unbelievable. And so to me, this was always like telling this great untold story of New York, you know, and putting this story together and being like, look, everything you see right here, started right here, and that to me is the power of this city, the power of this moment, and hopefully the power of this film once it gets out in the world.
There's also the club Mars is like prominently featured in here. Is it the reason that you decided to focus on that club is just because you had all the archival footage, or do you think that club in particular was important for everything that you're talking about in the film?
I mean, I think both. I think that, I guess to back up, like the film, the structure of the film is based on the archival. So, you know, we weren't like mining the internet for clips or like putting out like a, you know, like, hey, send your footage in from that time period kind of thing. It wasn't like that. It was really Yuki and Eli and RB O'Malley's archive, three guys who were downtown at the time. One in the 80s, Eli mid 90s, and then RB a little later. It's the strength of their archive through Eli's perspective of what he saw, because even though he didn't shoot a vast majority of the stuff at Mars, he was still there with Yuki, you know, every day, every week when that club was around. So I think, you know, just him seeing it firsthand and experiencing it was able to tell that story. But yeah, it's not, you know, we didn't like plug in Mars like randomly. Like it's all based on Eli's narrative, and it's of course based on the fact that Mars had a microphone and it had some of the best DJs, and it had Yuki who was, you know, not only hiring these guys, bringing them on and trusting them with each floor that he was doing, but also just he's super inspiring. Like he was like, you know, he was always out to try and find the new music, and who was mixing the new music and bringing everyone together under one roof. So, you know, it's great to be able to tell a story like that that's not available on the internet.
Yeah, because I definitely learned a lot of things, especially about Yuki, that I might not have known specifically, you know, how he was ahead of a lot of like club programming, and then even trying to do like a radio station through the club. A lot of things that people did later on in life, he was kind of ahead of them. So that was cool to see that side of the documentary as well, man. It's called All the Streets Are Silent, the convergence of hip hop and skateboarding, and also fashion, I think is a major component of this documentary as well. Would you guys say?
You want me to take that, Jeremy? 100%. I mean, this stuff that started in the streets of New York is now on the runways of Paris. I mean, you know, streetwear is fashion right now. I mean, it's on the cover of Vogue magazine. It's, you know what I mean? It's like this thing. I'm telling you, the power of this moment. Like once you look back, you know, and please go see the film, not just because I'm being selfish and I want everyone to go see the film, but like you will learn so much about like how did we get here? Like how is this, like this, these kids were like looked down upon back then for the way they dress with the baggy pants and you know, now it's just so accepted. This culture is the most important pop culture, whether it's fashion, whether it's music, whether it's like, it's just, it's all there is right now. And it is fashion.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Virgil. We really appreciate it. I'm just and I've seen the Stretch and Bobbito documentary. Obviously, I've seen the Zoo York mixtape, so I've seen a lot of the footage that was in there. But there's a lot of new footage that I've never seen before, and obviously, people who haven't watched those other documentaries are going to see all this for the first time. How hard was it, kind of like going through all the hours, and then also, did you find anything that you didn't you never seen before, or maybe like somebody that you didn't know was hanging out at a concert or something in the background when you were going through all this stuff?
Yeah, I could talk for an hour about that. I mean, there's a lot of material there. The Jay-Z was a total surprise. Yuki didn't even know that existed, even though it was in his tapes. His wife Mayumi filmed that, and he never knew about it, and she didn't remember that it was even Jay-Z. She thought it was like a street rapper.
Well, and Jeremy, to give some background on that, I mean, this was Jay-Z before he was Jay-Z. I mean, this was a young Jay-Z, you know, in a nightclub, just jumping on the stage. No one knew who he was, and it was an amazing discovery. But I'll let you keep going.
Yeah. So the way that those tapes sort of, you know, were labeled, you know, a lot of times it was, you know, the name of the evening, and then the DJ or whoever was working that night. And then a bunch of Japanese characters underneath that, you know, obviously I wasn't going to ask Yuki to translate each one of them once we had all the crates here. But some more information was probably in there that we just couldn't decipher. But yeah, like as it was with the Jay-Z, which was 1990, at that time they were creating these you know, like every 10 or 20 tapes we would see, there would be one that was sort of like a highlight reel that was made in camera, that didn't have any of the original audio, and it's kind of like a chopped up cut of maybe that month or the 2 months or whatever time period, right? And so we had about a second or two, or maybe 3 seconds of Jay-Z on the mic, and I knew it was him. And I called Yuki, and Yuki's like, no, 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 there's Jay-Z never played at my club. Like, he wasn't there. And I think at dinner that night with Mayumi, he was telling her that he thinks that I thought that I saw Jay-Z, and she's like, yeah, maybe that was Jay-Z. And the tape just says rap street style, New York rap street style on it or something. And yeah, and then you know, of course, seeing that little glimpse, it meant that the raw tape existed somewhere, maybe, because at that time I was only going through the crates that were of the hip hop night, which was Thursday night, I think Wednesday and Thursday. And so he wasn't giving me the other nights, when maybe there was one hip hop performance, but it was mainly non-hip hop in the club. And then it wasn't until then we started discovering, like, you know, some other, like, Jungle Brothers, some other groups that were coming by that were not in that hip hop section that he had stored. It was in another one. And that's when we found the raw footage of that Jay-Z performance from 1990.
Nice.
And if I can throw something in also, because I got to give a big shout out to Large Professor. You know, we were honored to have Large Professor do an original score for this film, and it just brings the damn thing to life in a way that I can't describe. But there is some footage of Large Pro that Jeremy found rapping up at Stretch and Bobbito that we put in the film. And I just thought it was so cool connecting this old footage of Large Pro with the soundtrack that he did in 2021 that sort of meant to sound a little bit like the 90s. Like it was just this nice sort of like moment of things coming together.
Do you think that there will be a director's cut with maybe some bonus footage a little bit later on?
Oof, we got to get permission from Eli for that, and from Yuki and everyone, but maybe we'll see.
Let's you know, if enough people go in the theaters and it's popular enough and someone gets behind us to do it 100%. I mean, you know, it was a really fun project to put together. I'd be up for doing a little bit more.
In the documentary, there's a lot of like celebrity appearances. You have Rosario Dawson, who actually does interviews in the documentary. You have Moby, who was a DJ at the club Mars, who went on to be the artist that he is today. ASAP Ferg, which I was surprised to kind of see in the film. Was there anybody that it was you were trying to reach out to that you couldn't get to, and how did you actually get the people that are in the film to do the interviews?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there's always would have loved to have Busta or some of the Wu. I mean, there's, you know, the list goes on, but you know, it's an independent documentary, so you can only get you know who you get. But yeah, I mean, Rosario's really tight with Eli, so that wasn't much of a stretch. Who are the other ones? Ferg and I have a bunch of mutual friends. Who else did you mention? Oh, Moby.
Moby.
Good.
Yeah.
Dana and Moby go way back.
Yeah, and we didn't, you know, I didn't even realize that Moby was, I knew he would DJ at clubs, but I didn't realize he was part of this story until the Yuki interview or the Eli Gesner interview, where he said, yeah, you know, Moby was our first DJ. And I was like, oh, then we got to interview Moby.
Yeah, man.
It was actually super. Yeah, it just sort of worked out. Like, it was kind of magical, because even people like Carla McCormick, who we were going to interview as like a big picture person, we didn't know he did the door at Mars. I mean, that was like a surprise during the interview. So it all sort of came together organically, and there were some really nice surprises. But we also did, you know, shout out to everyone who we interviewed, because we interviewed about 56 people, and we only used about 38, I believe, 39. So there were definitely some other amazing interviews. It's just there's only so much you can put into a you know, a one-part feature.
And the amount of people that were connected to Mars, I mean, DMC talks about Mars, DMC hung out at Mars. And like, it's crazy to think that, you know, Black Sheep, who had two gigantic hit songs in like 91, 92, they were DJs at Mars before they put out a record. Like, they were just DJing there. And so, you know, we interviewed Drez from Black Sheep, and it was just fascinating to talk to him. You know, like, yeah, he was like, I was just a DJ at Mars. Like, me and Long, we were just DJs while we were working on our first record. and just everything that came out of that club is just incredible.
Right. So this is a story. It's kind of like a love letter to that era, but also to New York City. I mean, it's not alienating the West Coast. There's like Mike Carroll is in there and some of the West Coast guys that you talk to, but it's about New York City. Do you think that New York City will ever be the same again?
I mean, I think it is. It kind of is right now. I mean, I think Lower East Side, Two Bridges, Chinatown Zone. There's so many amazing creators. Shout out Adam Zoo and all those kids. Just those guys are like what people are going to be doing a documentary about in 20, 30 years. They're really like pushing what's possible for like a 20-year-old to do. He's like cooking and into graffiti and like DJing, and he's super good at skating, and he like works at Supreme, and he's like helping the community. He saved Tompkins Square Park. I mean, those kids, all of them are doing really cool things. Sabrina's in a punk band, and Manon is like directing and shooting photos, and it's cool to see like the younger kids really pushing it forward. But I think New York is always there's always that new batch of kids who come in and push the limits, I think.
And what's funny is, like, I always say this, I always bitch and moan about New York because, I've been here forever, and it's always like, oh, it was so much cooler back then and it was so much better back then. And I think every generation does that. And I think it's less about the city and more about just like getting older and being pissed off that we're not young anymore. It's such a great city to be young in. You know what I mean? That as the older you get, you're like, damn, man, these kids are having so much more fun. So I'm just going to hate on the city. That's at least my opinion. Because it's not that the city was better. It was that I was better because I was 20,
Right. Well, let's be a little selfish, man. Tell me why 87 to 97 was the greatest decade of the 20th century, in your opinion.
Are you asking me or are you asking Jeremy? You're
Well,
asking me. You know what? It's funny. I'll go first. First of all, there was no technology. There were no cell phones. I know we all had pagers back then, but like every day was a mystery. You know what I mean? You would wake up in the morning, you couldn't text someone and be like, what are you doing? You couldn't buy movie tickets on a phone. You couldn't go on a computer. You had to go out in the city and you had to just exist and you had to discover things. And you would walk by a movie theater and be like, that's a cool looking poster. I've never heard of this movie. I don't know what it's about, but I'm going to go check it out. Or you hear a song, like discovery. Discovery was a very different thing during that time. And a lot of it was just sort of happy accidents. And I think now with algorithms and everything, you're sort of fed things. It's like, you're going to like this, you're going to like this. And nothing wrong with algorithms. They're right a lot of the time. You know what I mean? But like, you had to work hard back then to discover culture and to find culture. And a lot of times it was by accident. I went to an EPMD show by accident. Like, I forget how I got there. Thought I was going somewhere else. And I was like, never heard of these guys. These guys are amazing. You know what I mean? There was like this sense of discovery, and there was just so much new stuff. I mean, hip hop was you look at that period in hip hop, and the reason it's the golden era, and I know Clark Kent in the film talks about this, but it's like, KRS-One leads to Biggie a few years later, and Big Daddy Kane leads to Nas a few years later. You have this progression of this art form growing and changing and getting better and stronger and more powerful. So I think, now hip hop is the dominant musical language globally, and you were able to see this thing develop, and get better and get more accepted and more respected. And that's what made it a really special time.
right. Do you agree with that, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, as a skater growing up, I mean, all the best skate videos and that had the best music were pretty much that time period. For me, definitely more so like 94 to probably like 2002 or three. Like that was for me, when I was growing up, that was like the time period that I loved and cherished. And this goes back a little further. But yeah, I mean, the 87 to 97 is really like Eli starting at Mars to when Mixtape comes out. That's the time period that we're concerned about. But yeah, I mean, absolutely, like to echo Dana, like I think it was because hip hop was so new, and because I think skating had matured to a point where it was like it just sort of hit this like sweet spot, and you could still get away with like skating a public plaza or in the middle of the street without as much hassle as you do now. And just even the architecture and the way the city's changed. Some of those spots from back then are gone. You know, there's holes in the ground, and of course, there's always going to be generational shifts. But those, to us, those were, you know, the most important.
Nice, man. So I think you guys should all check out this documentary in theaters now. All the Streets Are Silent: The Convergence of Hip Hop and Skateboarding, 1987 and 1997. Jeremy, Elkin, and Dana Brown, thank you guys once again, man. We really appreciate it. And everybody go check out this film in theaters now, man. It's Animal Status only on Shade 45.